Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Let's start with the structural piece that keeps showing up no matter which angle you look from. Russia's ability to keep fighting at scale is still being quietly underwritten by China. This isn't new, but there's more clarity now on what that actually looks like in practice. China isn't shipping crates of missiles or drones, but it's providing the industrial guts that make them possible. Advanced machine tools, electronics, precision components, the kind of stuff that doesn't trend on social media, but absolutely decides whether Russia can keep launching hundreds of drones a night. That support shows up immediately on the battlefield, or more accurately, far behind it. Overnight earlier this week, Russia launched a massive wave of drones and a ballistic missile across Ukraine, hitting cities from Kyiv to Odessa to Zaporizhia. Air defenses did what they could, but enough got through to hit residential buildings, ports, energy facilities, and other civilian targets. This wasn't a one-off spike. It's an update to the pattern we've been tracking: sustained, industrially backed pressure designed to exhaust Ukraine over time. Now layer that over the diplomatic track, because yes, the talks are still happening. The Abu Dhabi process is continuing, and the big update here isn't that Donetsk remains the core issue. We knew that yesterday. It's that everyone is now saying it out loud, without euphemisms. The talks have been stripped down to one hard question: does Ukraine surrender the remainder of Donetsk Oblast or not? The U.S. position hasn't formally changed, but the framing has sharpened. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the Donetsk question as the single, very difficult issue left on the table. Russia wants the rest of it handed over. Ukraine is refusing. And importantly, neither side is pretending there's a creative workaround waiting in the wings. This is less about clever diplomacy now and more about raw leverage. From Kyiv's perspective, there's a subtle update worth noting. Ukrainian officials say the Russian delegation this time included actual military and intelligence figures, not just political placeholders. That's a procedural shift, not a breakthrough. But it does suggest Moscow wants to be taken seriously as a negotiator, even while continuing to apply pressure elsewhere. And that contradiction matters, because almost simultaneously, Russia struck a civilian passenger train in eastern Ukraine, killing civilians. This wasn't near the front. This wasn't ambiguous. It fits the same pattern we talked about yesterday. Transport networks, rail lines, and energy systems are increasingly treated as legitimate targets in Russia's campaign to grind down Ukrainian society. If Moscow's message at the table is "we're serious," its message in the air is "we're not stopping." Security guarantees are still hovering awkwardly over all of this. There's confirmation now that the draft framework includes European troops, primarily British and French, deployed after a ceasefire. That part is real. But there's also more candor about the limits of that idea. Without a U.S. backstop, those guarantees don't carry much weight, and everyone involved knows it. Russia, for its part, continues to reject any NATO-linked presence outright. Same line, same tone, very little evolution. While diplomats argue over borders and guarantees, winter is doing its job. Russia's attacks on Ukraine's energy system are having cumulative effects. Hundreds of thousands of households are still without power or heat, especially in Kyiv and northern regions. Generation capacity is meeting only a fraction of demand, and Ukraine is relying heavily on European imports and rolling blackouts to stay afloat. This isn't new from yesterday, but the update is the timing. The coldest stretch of winter is hitting at the same moment Russia's strike tempo remains high. That overlap is deliberate. Ukraine isn't just absorbing this. Over the past couple of nights, Ukrainian forces have continued striking into Russia's near rear, oil infrastructure, ammunition depots, command and control nodes. These aren't flashy offensives, and they're not meant to be. They force Russia to defend depth, repair logistics, and divert resources. It's pressure applied quietly, but it adds up. On the Russian side, the gap between official claims and reality is widening. Senior military leaders continue to report sweeping advances and captured settlements. Independent assessments paint a much slower picture, incremental movement measured in meters, not breakthroughs. What's interesting, and a slight update from yesterday, is that even pro-war voices inside Russia are increasingly skeptical of the official narrative. When your own Telegram crowd starts rolling its eyes, that tells you something about credibility erosion. The human cost continues to hang over everything. Estimates put combined Russian and Ukrainian military casualties approaching 2 million, with Russia accounting for the larger share. The Kremlin is still rejecting those figures outright, which is consistent with its long-standing refusal to publish real numbers. What's new isn't the denial, it's the downstream effects. Russia is leaning harder on recruitment bonuses, legal loopholes, and coercive practices to keep manpower flowing, while dealing with growing social strain at home. That strain shows up in other ways too. Europe has taken a more assertive step against Russia's shadow fleet this week, with French authorities grounding a tanker suspected of operating under a false flag. This is an update to the oil story we've been following. Enforcement is becoming more physical, less theoretical. Ukraine is actively pushing European partners to stop treating sanctions as paperwork exercises and start treating them as interdiction problems. One tanker doesn't change the war, but the direction matters. Beyond Ukraine, Russia is also adjusting its posture elsewhere. In Syria, Vladimir Putin hosted the country's new leader again, continuing Moscow's effort to preserve influence after Assad's fall. Russian forces are reportedly pulling back from the northeast while trying to lock in access to key bases on the Mediterranean. This is classic Kremlin pragmatism. Shed liabilities, keep assets. It's not a retreat so much as consolidation. In Central Asia, the slow drift away from Russian dominance continues. The US-backed C5+1 framework is becoming more operational, focusing on transport, minerals, and logistics. Azerbaijan's growing role and its deepening energy ties with Turkey are part of that broader picture. No one is confronting Moscow directly, but fewer eggs are going into the Russian basket. Hybrid warfare remains one of the ugliest through lines. Ukrainian authorities continue to uncover sabotage cases linked to Russian intelligence, many involving teenagers recruited through messaging apps with promises of easy money. Inside Russia, similar cases are being prosecuted in reverse, with young people accused of acting for Ukrainian handlers. This isn't new, but the scale is becoming harder to ignore. When both sides are weaponizing adolescents, that tells you how deeply the conflict has seeped into society. Cyber operations are part of that same ecosystem. A Russian-linked group compromised operational systems at multiple energy facilities in Poland late last month. No blackout, but real damage, disabled equipment, lost control systems. This wasn't a smash-and-grab hack. It required deep familiarity with how those systems work. It's a reminder that distributed energy infrastructure across Europe is now firmly in the target set. And inside Russia, the state is tightening its grip further. Lawmakers are moving toward giving the FSB sweeping authority to shut down communications, phones, internet, even mail, during vaguely defined security threats, with no liability for operators. Officially, it's about safety. Practically, it formalizes a nationwide kill switch for information whenever the Kremlin decides things are getting uncomfortable. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.